And so begins this time of holiday celebration. And I've been kind of taking the pulse of this congregation over the last few months. And there's kind of a whole mixture of range of experience with the holidays or with Christianity. And some people are invested in the tradition of Christianity, and some people are just kind of wanting to let it go because of certain things that have happened within their lives. But in a way, it's an orderly observation because of the time that we're in, December 3rd, the first Sunday in Advent. Advent comes from the Latin word adventus, which means arrival or coming of something wonderful or someone special. And in the Christian calendar, the word or the time of Advent is the expectation of Messiah. Powerful word, Messiah. An expectation of an outer event. And in unity, we interpret that just a touch differently, that the expectation of this is about an inner event, of the higher self, of our actual nature coming more into consciousness. And we have great hope around that. We have great effort and cultivation within our own discipline in our lives, do we not? With our practices and our readings and our dedication and how we choose to show up in life. So in a way, it doesn't have all that much to do with the Christian calendar per se. A lot of people are in recovery from some of those things, right? I'm a recovering this or I'm a recovering that. When we come into unity, we just as soon put aside some of those things, but there is a structure within it that may be quite helpful. For instance, the observance of hope. And today I want to address hope through a couple of illustrations. And the first one is a father and son story. The father was a man who was very rigid and very religiously fundamental in his world, and his son was receiving this indoctrination all the time from his father. As he grew, he became more and more rebellious and actually became an atheist in response or reaction to his father's continual pressure to adhere to a belief system that he didn't believe in. So much so that at one point in his life, he just left. And his father made his transition, his physical transition. The mother called the son and said, "Your father has passed. Would you like to come home?" And the son did, because he wanted to support his mother. One night when he was home at about 2 a.m., he was sitting in his father's study, looking at some personal effects, feeling his feelings around so many things. And there was a shift in consciousness that happened, and his father came in spirit. And in appearance looked much younger, much more playful, much more joyful. and looked at his son and said to his son, "We were both wrong. We were both wrong." And you may say, well, that sounds kind of like a fantastic story. But in my own family of origin, and I'm sure there are many, many people in this room that have had experiences around the unknown. Today is about taking the out of unknown, that are very instructive. And I remember my grandmother, I've shared this at least once here, but my grandmother, when she passed, my cousin Steve was somewhat clairvoyant or receptive to the spirit side of life, and my grandmother appeared to him the day after she passed. He didn't know that she had passed. And she said something very profound. She said, "Show love. It never fails. Love is the total understanding of everything that is." And then she left. And my cousin Steve picked up the phone and called his mother and said, "I just had a visit by Grandma. How did she get here?" And my aunt said to him, "Well, I was wanting to tell you, I just found out that she passed yesterday." So she came to him and gave him this proclamation, affirmation. And it's so important, I feel, within our own experience to keep our expectation of this type of shift, this type of what seems to be a miracle happening in our own lives during this time of year, to not get so caught up in the fundamentalism, or as a friend used to call it, the funny mentalism of the mind. We were both wrong. And I say that not to poke fun of the path of people around fundamentalist Christianity, but there's probably a lot of people in this room that have, as a response, left previous faith traditions that were about that type of situation, that had maintained wounds within their heart, within their mind, and maybe even sitting on the fence as to even thinking whether or not to be an atheist. But an atheist is just simply a theist, someone without belief. And who are we to say? Maybe that's a place on the path, a very important place on the path, to be weighing our beliefs as to what is so. So the father in this story that I shared is, or was, a harbinger for a new possibility. He experienced something as he made his physical transition. He experienced a releasing and a letting go of the hardness of heart and the rigidity of mind. And he came back to his son revitalized and young and playful and lighthearted, to share with him so that his son could make a transition in his own life. I use the word harbinger because recently I have signed up for something online called Word of the Day. And on Tuesday, the word of the day was harbinger. And the definition of harbinger is one that initiates a major change. A person or thing that originates or helps open a new activity, a method, or a technology. So the Father was filled with a new way of being, and He came to love His Son, something that was not possible within that physical experience for either of them. But He came as a harbinger to create a major change because He had had one. Something happened within Him, and it created a new hope within the Son. And so sometimes you and I are, when we come up against the possible unknowns of life, we may get fundamental in our own parameters and our own definition of what is real and what is acceptable and appropriate for our own life experience. We may say, well, that's just unknown. I don't think that that's right for me. Scary stuff, unknown stuff. But I would say in response to that, in my own life too, that which is not known is filled with possibility and love and good. In unity, there is this expectation of good that we have as an intention or an ethic within this faith tradition. An expectation of good. So, and I mention this story today because there may be a lot of people in this room that have had issues with parents, that during the holiday season we revisit some of this pain around a parent or somebody significant in our lives that we feel estranged from and that we'd like to have a healing with. But we just don't know how quite to go about it. And another reason for mentioning it is to possibly open up an expanse within your own life, to step out of the known, to have a renewed hope as to your own life experience, because you may feel dry or not hopeful of this time of year, with all of its reflection of joy and goodwill. You may privately be suffering within your own life. And is it not true that this human experience is a mixture of all of it? It's all part of it. And can we love ourselves in our present position? Can we have hope? Can we accept that there may be unknown good that is coming to us, that we can be open and receptive to allow a freshness and an inspiration? I'm reminded in the daily word that I just shared with you a few moments ago from a couple weeks back. In the absence of certainty, anything is possible. And we really want to be certain most of the time. We want to be in control of ourselves because it's culturally reinforced that we be in control and not make a fool of ourselves, not embarrass ourselves or anyone else, but to be kind of hemmed in by a certain way of being. And that's the predictability of that is necessary in a sense, in terms of us all getting along and being together. And yet, at the same time, we can have perhaps an opening. And I've told people, and I'm going to share it with you here and now, and my intention is not to offend anybody. But I've said to people, if the God that you have isn't serving you, get another God. And that may be shocking to people. What do you mean, get another God? Are you polytheistic? Are you a pagan? No, that's not what I mean at all. The God that we have is a God that we have constructed in our own minds. It may be a fundamentalist God. It may be a judgmental God that is not acceptable to us at this time. And if you think about your own life experience, the God that you had when you were 10 years old is not the God that you have now. So the change is within us, not within the Spirit. The Spirit is omnipresent. It is unconditional love. It is a presence and a power that is not capricious or willful. It shines like the sun. And the only distinction that we have around perception is the clouds of our own way of seeing God. Our concept of God is the most important factor in our lives for at any given moment. It is forming our very next experience in the outer. This is words by Charles Fillmore, the co-founder of the Unity Movement. So we may go through all types of revisions around our God. And a friend told me not too long ago, he said, beliefs about God are containers in the mind to keep the divine manageable. I'm going to repeat that. Beliefs about God are containers in the mind to keep the divine manageable. And I countered my friend with three other layers. Because we are talking about layers. We're really addressing going deeper with our own experience of what we call God. And I said the next layer is faith in God is a step in our alliance with our source. And then we move into a felt knowing of God is a partnership with presence. And then even deeper, oneness with God, with that presence, is a fulfillment in a design that is held within divine mind. Divine mind is not about a religious doctrine. Divine mind and divine presence is the intelligence of the entire creation, and that is constantly holding us as part of itself and inviting us to enter into that partnership with it. And that may all seem kind of radical to you, I don't know. Or maybe you might embrace it as a breath of fresh air. Somewhere on the spectrum, I'm sure that's where you're at. And all of that is okay. I'm not trying to convince you of anything. All I'm endeavoring to do is to create a space in this room and in your heart for a felt knowing of your own divinity. And that's what this season is all about. a felt knowing of your own divinity, of good, of possibility, of joy, of hope, all of it. Because it's fruitless and really anti-productive to say to anyone, your beliefs are wrong. It's not my intention. But we have to ask ourselves whether or not our beliefs are serving the highest good for our own expression into our own oneness with the divine. That's what it's the heart of all this. In Lessons in Truth, this book that was first published in 1894, the language is old school. Some of the concepts are not cool. I don't know. But there's some truth in these concepts, and I would like to share just a paragraph. Each person must sooner or later learn to stand alone with his or her God. Nothing else avails. Nothing else will ever make you master of your own destiny. There is in your own indwelling Lord, your own indwelling presence, all the life and health and strength and peace and joy and wisdom and support that you will ever need or desire. No one can give it to you as can this indwelling presence. It is the spring of all joy and comfort and power. Are we hopeful of that? Are we desiring it? Is it the ground of being of your life?
Yes.
Can I get an amen? Had a gentleman in my past church center, we called it Unity Center of the Valley, and I would get kind of motivated around certain concepts, and he'd be in the back going, "Amen, brother! Amen!" And yet we have to honor our own humanity within this expansion possibility. I remember about 10 years ago reading in an AARP magazine, Morgan Freeman, the actor, was being interviewed. And the interviewer was saying, Mr. Freeman, you are a multi-gazillionaire, and you could live anywhere that you want. Why do you choose to live in rural Mississippi? And I thought something that he said was so profound. He said, because I choose to live in rural Mississippi and have a few horses and a few acres, and I have a restaurant downtown that I own and so forth, I do it because of psychic safety. Psychic safety. And that means respect of his own process, respect of his own mental and emotional life. And this is very, very important for us within this whole idea of becoming our truest self, is we have to, at least in my experience, respect our own timing around opening to this divine nature of ours, and allow it to divinize or spiritualize these parts of ourselves that are very personal, that are very vulnerable at times, to love them into this fullness. So it's important to pay attention to that, to enter into the unknown in a gradual way, to come to a place of saying, wow, that was unknown before, and now it's my experience. It's just a gentle, loving progression of opening. That the Spirit's way is not harsh and forced or a have to. It's a gentle, loving opening of the heart like a flower to the sun. There's no have to in any of this. But my experience is that it is joyful, hopeful, and it becomes fascinating to me. And I want to share another experience, because we were talking about this father and son story and my grandmother. And then there was another experience. I was out in the backyard of my home in Cottonwood, Arizona, painting a shed. And all of a sudden there was a shift in my consciousness, and I looked around, and coming towards me was my grandfather, my grandmother, and my father, all who had passed. They were coming to me in the twinkling of an eye, and they simply said, "Tell your brother that he needs to clean up his act, or we're taking him home." Powerful medicine. When I sat down with my brother, his eyes went, oh. I think that created a shift. It created a shift for my brother. Something like that would. But this type of experience is, I feel, important for us to have this expectation of the mystery of the unknown, and to know that it is a good, safe thing. I mean, if you think about the stories, the Christ stories, they are filled with supernatural events. That which is beyond the natural law of things. That's what grace is. Supernatural. As we're rushing around and doing all the do for holidays, is to have a expectation of the unknown in your life. Expecting this good, this beauty, this joy, that there is this presence and power, there is this joy that is part of all of it, all of the texture, all of the experiences. And I trust God in you. I trust God in myself to guide us into more and more of that presence. Thank you very much.